Today we are on the heart and blood vessels part 2, and it's kind of a longer one, so I'm going to jump straight to the question of the day, which is, do energy drinks affect your blood pressure? And I read some studies on this, and probably should lay off this. Look, my hand's even shaking. Oh my gosh. Okay, I don't drink a lot of these. It takes me probably 1 day or 2 days to drink 1 can, and I just think they taste good, but obviously it's affecting me. Look at my hand. Or maybe I'm just anxious, I don't know. Anyway, so interesting to find out how they affect your blood pressure, and we'll get to that later. So I do want to go over the pre-lecture. And again, if you feel like you're comfortable with this already, you can skip this part. But the rhythmic expansion and recoil of an arterial wall can be felt as a pulse. And you can feel your pulse multiple places over your body. You can feel it right here. You can feel it in your neck as well as other places. But that is because expansion of recoil as of the arterial walls as your heart beats. So normally the pulse rate equals the heart rate because the arterial walls pulse whenever the left ventricle contracts. So remember, the left ventricle is the chamber that sends the blood out to the body, to the systemic arteries and all of those. So that's kind of where the focus will be today, is the left ventricle. So blood pressure is the pressure of blood against the wall of a blood vessel. And I always love this word, sphygmomanometer, and I gotta look so I spell this right. Sphygmomanometer can be used to measure blood pressure at the brachial artery. So typically the brachial artery comes down your arm, and they'll typically measure it in this area, like the crook of your elbow somewhere. And so, yeah, they're measuring the pressure in an artery, that one specifically. So there's systolic pressure and diastolic pressure, and you need to know the differences between the two. So systolic pressure is reached during ejection of blood from the heart. So when the left ventricle contracts and pushes that blood out to all of the arteries, that's the systolic pressure, that kind of pulse wave that goes out. The diastolic pressure occurs when the left ventricle is relaxing. So when it's not pumping, it's kind of the if you will, at rest pressure of the arteries when that ventricle is not forcing blood out into them. So high blood pressure is called hypertension, and if you remember from our osmosis chapter, hyper means high. So hypertension is the high blood pressure, and hypo, with the O in it, means low. So low blood pressure is called hypotension. So when they take your blood pressure, they'll give you 2 numbers, and it'll be something over something. So if you are told that your blood pressure is 120 over 80, the top one is your systolic pressure, and the bottom, 80, is your diastolic pressure. And it makes sense that your systolic is higher than the diastolic because this is where the left ventricle is pumping out the blood, and so there's going to be more pressure at that time than during, it's called diastole, when the heart is at rest. So, if you've ever taken blood pressure, I was going to be a nurse at one time and I took the CNA class, and for some reason this was so hard for me to do. They have machines now that can do it, but if you do it manually like this, what you'll do is you'll want to pump this up to higher than what their systolic pressure would be. And what that does is closes off the artery. So as you have the stethoscope here, you shouldn't hear any sounds because there's no blood going through that artery. You've blocked it off with this cuff here. The systolic pressure happens when, and then you slowly release the pressure in your cuff, and there's a pressure gauge right here. And once that artery can open, you'll hear the whooshing sound. I think it's called, oh, it's been a minute, Korotkoff sound. I might be saying that wrong. But that's when the blood starts to flow and you can hear it in the artery. And the pressure at which you hear that is their systolic blood pressure. And then when the artery is completely open, there's going to be no sounds. And so once you stop hearing that sound, the pressure that you're at there is the diastolic pressure. And some of you probably know more about that than me if you already work in the medical field. So, all right. Interpret the chart below. What happens to the following parameters as blood moves through the vessels and why? So this chart is showing three different things. It's showing blood pressure down here at the bottom. It's showing blood velocity, how fast is it moving through the vessels per second. And this is showing total cross-sectional area of the vessels. So right here, and this is already labeled down here, but these are the capillaries, this kind of bluish color or purplish color. And over here on the left, we have the aorta, and then the arteries and the arterioles. So remember, it always goes in that order. We go from the heart to the arteries, to the arterioles, to the capillaries, to the venules, and then to the veins, and then back to the heart. So just, if you will, pause it for a minute and look at this graph and just kind of think about what it is saying to you. And I'm going to keep going because this is on video. So area, if you remember the capillaries, since they're so branched, they're taking up a lot of the area of the vessels. So compared to the arteries and the veins, the capillaries take up most of the area of your vessels. Sorry, my voice is a little raw today. I had to yell a little bit at my stinky 7th graders. So velocity, it starts off high in the aorta and the arteries and the arterioles, starts to go down because it's just getting pumped out of the heart. So it's got a lot of velocity. It's moving pretty quick. You'll notice as it gets to the capillaries, it's almost to 0. And the reason for that is you want it to slow down because that's where you're exchanging things. You don't want the blood just rushing through because you need to exchange those materials at the capillaries, and we'll go over that more in a minute. And then it picks up a little bit as it goes back through the venules and the veins, and we'll see why that happens as well. As far as the pressure in the aorta, and you see all of these representing each time it pumps or beats, that's going to be high because the aorta, it's almost the diameter of a garden hose, I think is what it said. And that's where the blood is initially getting pumped out. So the pressure is going to be high there. And then as you get further and further away from the heart, it's going to get lower and lower. So let's talk about blood pressure now. Blood pressure is very high at the arteries because it's the first vessel that is encountered after the left ventricle that's in the heart that's pumping out blood to the body. going to abbreviate it as LV, left ventricle. So what's going to happen is your blood pressure will decrease as blood moves through the system. So this first part here is kind of explaining this portion of the graph. Onto blood velocity. So that's going to be referencing this part of the graph. Blood velocity is highest at the arteries. Again, because that's the first vessel it encounters after it leaves the heart, after it's being pumped out. And then blood velocity decreases through capillaries. That's where the exchange occurs. We don't want it going too fast. And blood must be slow and low pressure at capillaries for exchange. And this last bullet point here is referring to this portion of the graph. So cross-sectional area of vessels. Arterioles diverge, which means branch out, into capillaries, so there's a lot of area for exchange. So if you think about this as like driving down the freeway, you've got 4 lanes here, and all of a sudden it starts to converge into 3 lanes and then 2, and then now you've hit a construction zone, a one-lane construction zone, you're gonna have to slow down for the amount of cars to fit through there. So you drive in one lane for a while. That's like the capillary right there. So you can be going a little faster, and then as you converge, you'll slow down at the capillaries in the construction zone, so exchange can occur. And then as you get out of the construction zone and the road widens again, you can start to go faster. And that's kind of what you're seeing right here with velocity. So next up, we're going to talk about capillary exchange. So remember that capillaries exchange with nearby tissues or cells, and pressure and velocity of blood is again very low here to allow exchange. And so try to remember here what we want to get into the cells and out of the cells. So oxygen and nutrients diffuse from the blood to the cells, and your blood got that from the digestive system and from your respiratory system. It needs to get into the cells so your cells can use it for cellular respiration and for other things. And carbon dioxide, which is a byproduct, or if you will, a waste product of cellular respiration. And there are also other wastes produced by your cells, will diffuse from the cells to the blood so it can be taken out of the body. And this next diagram we're going to look at here is very oversimplified, and we're kind of lying about some things here, but it's a complicated concept and we are simplifying it for you. So you're welcome. So two forces move blood through capillary walls. There's blood pressure and there's osmotic pressure. So here, let's just label this picture a little bit first. We've got an arteriole here. Remember, which branched off from an artery, which came off from the heart in the left ventricle. And then down here, we have a venule, which is going to lead into a vein, which will lead back to the heart and the let's see, is it left or right atrium? So blood pressure generally causes to move from capillaries to tissues or cells, and that's where oxygen and nutrients move out. And this is representing the capillary, by the way. So at the arteriole, you're going to have high blood pressure, and you're going to have low osmotic pressure, and so things are going to tend to move out of the capillary. So pressure forces out fluids carrying oxygen and nutrients out to cells. So that's where you're having most of the oxygen and nutrients going into the tissues and cells, is right here just past the arterial, because that's where the blood pressure is the most high. And with osmotic pressure, this generally causes fluid to move from tissues or cells to the capillary, so in the other direction. So carbon dioxide and waste move in to the blood. So here, since we're getting further away from the heart, you're going to have low blood pressure and a high osmotic pressure. And the osmotic pressure is caused by trapped proteins in the blood. Will attract water. So here it's kind of pulling everything in this direction. So pressure draws fluids carrying carbon dioxide, I'm going to abbreviate CO2, and waste back into blood. So up here at the arterial end of capillaries, blood pressure is higher than osmotic pressure. So it's kind of repetitive, but you need to know this, so it's good. So fluid with oxygen and nutrients pushed out of capillary or blood into the cell. Down here at the venule end of capillaries, the osmotic pressure is higher than the blood pressure. And so remember, when you have high osmotic pressure, that's going to want to pull fluids toward it. So fluid with carbon dioxide and wastes are pulled back into blood. So this isn't completely true, but fluid movement in and out of capillaries should be equal to maintain fluid balance. In all honesty, and I could be wrong, but from what I've learned, the fluid that goes in is actually more than what comes out, but your lymphatic system will come back and pick that up and drain it back into the blood. You don't need to know that. Just part of why we're lying to you a little bit here, so you don't have to know so many things. So now let's talk about veins a little bit. So movement of blood through veins. Within veins, we saw on that chart that the velocity increases a little bit, but the pressure remains low. So you have these venous valves that we mentioned before, and what they do is valves close as blood flows upward. So you have your blood moving in this direction, and after it passes by, they'll snap closed so it can't fall back down. It's headed to the heart. This prevents retrograde or backward flow. And when these valves are faulty or not working properly, you can get varicose veins. Okay, and all of these three things here are answering this question: how does blood return to the heart without blood pressure, or without like these having any smooth muscle in them or any of that? The biggest one I would say, obviously you have to have the valves, but the skeletal muscle pump. So your skeletal muscles, think in your legs, for example, contract around veins. So if you look in this picture, let's just say, this is specify, let's say this is your calf muscle. And as it flexes and becomes more contracted and thicker, it's going to squeeze that vein and help propel the blood toward the heart. And then once it gets past this valve and it snaps shut, it's going to keep on going. So propels blood upward. And I know this was kind of a big deal when my mom was sick. She was, I guess, what you would call bedridden. She had a hard time getting out of bed. And she hated it, but they'd make her get up and walk around. And I think part of that was just to maintain muscle tone and prevent pneumonia and things like that, but also to get these skeletal muscle pumps going so her blood and fluid doesn't build up in her lower extremities and it can help move it back to the heart. Now, this one you don't necessarily need to study, but it's still good to know. It's the respiratory pump. So when you inhale, the volume of your thoracic cavity increases. And anytime you increase the size of a container, it's going to lower the pressure. So as you inhale and your chest cavity expands, that's going to make lower pressure. And this helps to draw blood upwards from your abdominal cavity. So think like a turkey baster. It's got the bulb at the end and it's got the tube. And if you squeeze the bulb and then let go, and that container expands, the volume inside decreases, or the pressure, sorry, the volume increases, the pressure decreases, and it'll draw fluid toward it. So that's another way to help get blood back to the heart. But these are the two main ones you need to know. So blood pressure effects on the body. Remember hypertension, hyper means high, so that's high blood pressure. And the problems with this and why doctors are so concerned with high blood pressure is it weakens your arteries and it can actually cause artery rupture. So we're going to just take a few notes off to the side here. High blood pressure causes the arteries to harden as well, so they're not as flexible. So that's going to make the heart work harder in order to be able to pump blood through those hardened arteries. So let's talk about hypertrophy for a minute. That's enlargement of the heart because the heart is working so hard to pump those blood through those hardened vessels. And so it gets bigger, just like any other muscles that you work out. And that's not a good thing, actually, in regards to the heart. Kidney failure, high blood pressure can cause kidney failure because the hardened arteries make filtering the blood more difficult, so your kidney has to work harder. We want to take all of the, I shouldn't use the word pressure. We want to take as much work off of our organs as we can. So anytime you're adding extra work, that's not a good thing. So hardened arteries. Make filtering blood more difficult. So kidneys have to work harder. So, some more things that can help with all of this with high blood pressure are diuretics. So this makes the kidney filter more fluids. It's going to make it so you pee more. Excuse me, urinate more. Pee is fine. And when you have less fluid going through your vessels, that's going to mean less blood pressure. So that's something that can help lower your blood pressure is diuretics. Another is something called beta blockers and ACE inhibitors. And what these do are they block hormones that raise blood pressure and also chemicals that narrow vessels. Remember, when your vessels are more narrow, it's going to make the pressure inside them greater. So if it can block those from becoming so narrow, it'll help to lessen the blood pressure. And I'm gonna, hope this doesn't get too confusing. Got one more to add. Just kind of separate that one out here. Nitroglycerin. This widens arteries. So that in itself is going to lower blood pressure. It can reduce chest pain. And increases blood and oxygen to the heart. I ran out of space, so we're abbreviating here. That's a lot of writing. I'll leave this here for a second. So the question of the day, do energy drinks affect your blood pressure? You can probably assume that because we're asking that, it's going to be a big resounding yes. And I read, like I said, I read a study on this, and they tested people. Let's see, how many ounces is this? This is 16 ounces. They had two groups. They had a control group that was given a placebo, and then they had an experimental group that was given energy drinks. And I don't know the brand, but I like Monster, sugar free. Not promoting this by any means. Don't drink these. These are awful. But they gave them, I think, 32, so that would be 2 cans of these, which is a lot. If I drank 2 of these, I would pass out, or have a panic attack or something. But those that drank these had significantly higher blood pressure. And something else that I thought was interesting is it actually affected the electrical activity of the heart. And I don't know how much any of you know about EKGs, but it actually lengthened the QT portion of the, and if you don't know what this means, that's fine. Just know that it messes with the electrical activity of the heart as well. So it lengthened the QT portion of the EKG wave, and it was significant, almost to the point where it's something that should be monitored. And so I'm trying to remember exactly how it worded it, but when that happens, it allows more time for the ventricles to refill. And therefore, if you have more blood being pumped out of your heart and slower beats, you're going to have higher blood pressure. So don't drink these. I know I'm the, what's the saying? The pot calling the kettle black. But And something else that's interesting, I just heard this, I didn't read it in the study that I read, but they've done similar experience with just caffeine alone, and they didn't get the same results. It didn't have as much of an effect, and so it's some sort of combination of the ingredients that are in here that is particularly bad for your heart. So, yeah. Okay, next page. Is our last one? Our last one. Disorders. We always got to talk about the disorders. So, atherosclerosis is how you say that. And this is caused by plaques in your blood vessels, usually caused by a diet high in saturated fat and cholesterol. So this will increase your blood pressure. If you look at this diagram here, this is specifically in a coronary artery, so in the heart. And if you get this fat and cholesterol that builds up in here, it's narrowing the size of the vessel. And I think this is an actual picture of it. And so when you, again, if the vessel gets smaller, it's going to increase the pressure. This can also lead to brittle arteries that rupture. A stroke is when a cranial arteriole bursts or is blocked, and a portion of the brain dies due to lack of oxygen. And so a result of this, it can lead to paralysis, and this all depends. Hang on, let me write this. Can lead to paralysis or death depending on degree and duration. So obviously a stroke is just as urgent as a heart attack, and sometimes someone will be having symptoms of it, but they don't seem incredibly alarming, like half of the facial muscles paralyzed or mixing up their words a little bit. But just like with a heart attack, the sooner you get them to help, the better their chances of surviving and recovery are. And I always think it's so interesting because it depends on where the stroke is in the brain as far as what is affected, like whether it's your facial muscles or your speech or a certain body part. And then we have myocardial infarction or an MI or a heart attack. And this is when those coronary arteries here that provide the heart muscle itself with blood get blocked. And we all know if you deprive cells of oxygen, they're going to die. So a portion of the heart dies due to lack of oxygen. So an aneurysm, and this, I don't know how much genetic this is. I've heard it's genetic, runs in my family, so yay. So yeah, let's keep drinking these. I'm sorry, I only keep bringing this out because we're talking about it today. I'm not even drinking it right now. So an aneurysm is when the arterial wall weakens due to high blood pressure or plaques, and that wall will actually balloon because it doesn't have the elasticity or whatever that it used to have. So with this, the vessels can rupture and bleed internally. So treatment for these things, when those plaques or little fat, what's the word? Plaques dislodge, it can cause clots. And these clots can be dissolved chemically, medications. You've probably heard of bypass surgery, and with this, a blood vessel from another part of the body is used to bypass a coronary artery in the muscle of the heart. That is clogged. And so there can be a different number replaced. So if you have like a triple bypass, they're replacing 3. If you have a double bypass, they're replacing 2. If you have a quadruple bypass, they're replacing 4. Angioplasty is what you see here. So this is when a small balloon is inserted into the clogged artery and it's inflated and it forces that vessel open. Sometimes they will use something called a stent to keep the vessel open. And what a stent is, it's metal mesh and they actually have to use chemicals to coat the artery wall to keep cells from growing over that mesh and then causing even more problems. So that's it. I just wanted to mention I'm starting to, and I don't know how consistent I'll be with this, but I found that when I was learning stuff like that, it helped for me to watch YouTube videos, and I know you guys know how to search up your own YouTube videos, but I've been trying to find some relevant and simple is my goal here. If you're struggling with all this in-depth stuff, you can go watch these videos and get kind of a more basic understanding and then go back and try to understand the more in-depth stuff. Like I said, I'm used to teaching 12-year-olds, so I've got a bunch of these kind of more, they're kind of childish, so if you don't like them, you don't have to watch them, and I put optional next to them on Canvas, but I'm going to try to add some stuff here and there to help you guys out if you're struggling with understanding this, because this is some in-depth stuff, and yeah, I want to do whatever I can to help you guys be successful. So let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you guys have a great day.